you
All
just
right.
say yes?
He says we're good.
Once I have my readers on, I can't see them. I call to order the special meeting of the Governing Board for the Scottsdale Unified School District. It is Thursday, August 13th, 2020, and the time is 4:03 p.m. All rise. Vice President Beckman, will you please lead us in the pledge? Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I will have a roll call starting on my right.
Jan Michael Greenberg.
Sandy Kravitz.
Barbara Perleberg. Patty Beckman. And Allison Beckham. All 5 governing board members are present, and we have a quorum. I'll be introducing today's special meeting. Last year, the district entered into a contract with the search firm McPherson & Jacobson when seeking a new superintendent. The contract included a follow-up session to be facilitated by McPherson & Jacobson so that the governing board could engage in a public discussion about the incoming superintendent's performance goals and priorities for the upcoming school year. The meeting will be facilitated by Dr. Steve Joel, who you should be familiar with, as he is the McPherson & Jacobson consultant in charge of the SUSD superintendent search last winter. We appreciated Dr. Joel's efforts and have been pleased with our chosen candidate, Dr. Scott Menzel. It has been an uncertain and unpredictable time to enter a new job, especially a school district, during the initial stages of the pandemic. Dr. Menzel, your communication and leadership skills have been greatly appreciated. As I mentioned, today's discussion will be facilitated by Dr. Steve Joel, who is joining us virtually from Nebraska. Welcome, Dr. Joel.
Thank you.
We will also have a recorder, and our recorder, thank you, is Gladys Wagner. The agenda includes an opportunity for Dr. Menzel to provide an update and begin the discussion on his performance objectives. Each governing board member is asked to participate fully, listen with respect and civility. This is meant to be a conversational format. Our purpose today is to establish draft performance goals and establish next steps with the final objective of the governing board approving the goals. Dr. Joel, I will turn the meeting over to you. Welcome to our first hybrid in-person virtual meeting. Thank you.
Excellent. Very good. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, I have to tell you, I would much rather be there than here. Like you and everybody else, I'm absolutely going stir crazy, having left Lincoln. I think my wife and I maybe twice since March, and that was just to go sit in driveways and see grandkids. It's a really, really challenging time right now for all of educators across the country, and it's not unique to any one state or any one area. I think it's tough for 20-year veterans that have been doing the job for a while, and certainly a challenge for superintendents that are trying to launch a successful start to their journeys and their careers. It's been a real pleasure working with you. It's been a real pleasure having conversation with Dr. Menzel over a series of months. It appears that that things are going in the right direction. So the purpose of Phase 5 is really the basis of our guarantee. And it's built around the premise that if boards and superintendents come together and identify performance priorities, it creates a performance-based environment in which both the superintendent and the board can judge themselves at a given point. And I'm well aware of conversations with Allison that 3 of you will perhaps going to be cycling off the board in January, and that the time that you're going to be working with Dr. Menzel is fairly limited, but nonetheless, it's very, very important work. And so as the governing board that made the hire, now it's your opportunity to work with him to create what the priority workflow should be between now and, let's say, the end of December. And then hopefully this next board that'll represent a different team will take up some of that work and begin to look at what the rest of the year is. So having said that, I have put together, if you have my slides, I put together a variety of informational sources. I don't intend to go over those, but I would ask and encourage you to look at those at your leisure. It's about the relationship. Every superintendent and every board that I've ever worked with, when they come together in this type of format, then really good things happen for your kids. I mean, at the end of the day, that's the ultimate goal. And, I'm happy if you get a chance to look at it and you ever want to just have a conversation that's in there. But it's how to make the relationship thrive. It's what are the primary roles of the superintendent. When you as a board think about Dr. Menzel's work, what are those things that are really standards for the profession, the superintendent profession? What are the roles of the board in terms of, what are the lanes, the primary lanes of responsibility that the board has in terms of working with the superintendent? It doesn't minimize conversation and or discussion and sometimes discourse, but it really lends itself to the importance of that focus. The next section is really the things that you can expect from your superintendent in terms of behavior, actions, workflow, those kinds of things. I mean, you've all figured out now that this pandemic is real stuff, and there's going to be a lot of decisions that are going to be made, and those are going to be dissected by your staff and your students and your parents and your community. And every superintendent in America is going to have to figure out a way to live through this, because it's an absolute no-win, and there's just a lot of risk for people to turn away from public education during these times. So you can look at that as, what should you expect of your superintendent? And then I also put in there, what are fair expectations that the superintendent should have of the board? And, while, every superintendent would love a unanimous vote on every single issue, it's not possible, and it doesn't happen anymore. But it's really about what do you do during those times where there is some disagreement and, decisions are made. But the most important thing that you do as a board of directors is you evaluate the performance of your superintendent. That's going to be the responsibility. And I would suggest to you that before you turn over your file folders and keys, that you do offer Dr. Menzel some constructive feedback before he goes, based on the goals that we developed tonight. I put something in there about communications and effective superintendents, something again that you might be interested in. And then I compiled a list of, this is probably not, something that veteran school board members really appreciate seeing, but just, tips for board members. And, I think, if you look at the landscape in the country right now, it's really, really clear. Districts that have superintendent turnover on a pretty regular basis have major disconnects between administration and boards. I was talking with a superintendent on the East Coast today who's just had it with the pandemic, and he's going to resign, and we were just trying to talk through that. And I left that conversation thinking to myself, as a result of what we're all going through right now, not to mention the budget difficulties that almost every state is experiencing, challenges of public education, and then the outcome of the election, whichever way it goes, is going to create for a very, very stressful environment. I predict that there's going to be a lot of superintendent vacancies around the country because relationships are going to be maligned as a result of decisions and indecisions. So again, my intent was never to read any of that to you, but at your leisure, I'd say take a look at it. It serves as a reminder for the importance of your work and for the importance of you and Dr. Menzel to work as closely as you can to be mutually supportive. So that's the end goal tonight, is to create a draft set of performance expectations. I'll work you through a little activity, but first I think it's important that we give Dr. Menzel a few minutes to just kind of talk about his first 45 days. And I had a chance to, again, read his entry plan. It's as good as any entry plan I've seen of any superintendent going in. Entry plans always sound good. They look good. They make sense, but it isn't until you get into it that you realize that things could be a little bit different. So let's turn it over to Dr. Menzel and then give the board an opportunity to maybe ask some questions if you have them. And then we're going to go to work on mutual performance expectations. Dr. Menzel?
Thank you, Dr. Joel. I appreciate that, and thank you for setting the stage, and good afternoon, members of the governing board. The first 45 days have been pretty eventful, and the first thing I want to say is thank you, because one of the things that you did when you hired me is provided an opportunity for me to spend some time between March 17th and June 30th in getting to know the community, have in-depth conversations, and engage, so that it really did have the impact of helping flatten the learning curve. I can't imagine what it would have been like if the first day I was engaging with the leadership team here was July 1st. So the first thing I want to say is that it's been longer than 45 days, but I appreciate that because I think while none of us knew exactly what path this pandemic would take us on, we've been able to build relationships and hit the ground running as a result of some of the pre-work that was done. I did distribute the reminder of the 90-day plan, and to Dr. Joel's point, that was all done in an environment where we anticipated one thing, and some of those are standard fare when you're starting a new superintendent position, but there were four primary areas that I outlined of focus that I thought were important. First was, and I mentioned this during the interviews as well, conducting a listen and learn tour. As a new superintendent coming in, the top priority is to get to know the community, understand what the hopes and aspirations are for the public education system. Part of that process is also understanding what the issues and challenges are, where are the points of frustration. Every school district has points of pride, and every school district has opportunities for growth and improvement. And the only way that as a leader of the organization, you know those things is by spending a lot of time listening and less time talking. In a COVID environment, that doesn't happen the same way it used to. I mean, normally we would convene town halls, focus groups, have coffee chats in different places, and none of that's been possible. In addition, most of the time has been spent getting ready for the school year in this COVID environment. But as I mentioned, one of the two tools that I thought was important to bring to the district was thought exchange. And so that tool, and the reason why I include that in the listen and learn part of the report is it's an opportunity to get authentic feedback, not just a survey where you're answering on a 5-point scale, but people get to share their ideas. So our first thought exchange was about, what are the issues and concerns related to COVID and restarting school? And we had 936 participants, 977 different thoughts that were shared, and 38,258 ratings. So if you didn't participate in it, individuals can sign up, put their thought, it's that their thought's anonymous, and the rating is anonymous. But if you agree with the thought, you can give it 5 stars, 4 stars. If you disagree with the thought, you can give it 1 or 2 stars. And then we're able to present a report that identifies, what gained traction in our community. In that thought exchange, and I'm sorry I didn't print out a copy of all of that for everyone here, but I can do it. The number one theme, and we do have the report on our website, but the number one theme, the large green bar here, is not safe to return. The biggest concern, and the thing that was rated highest, was not safe to return. The second and third were enhanced distance learning, because there were a lot of questions. Remember, this was launched in early July. A lot of questions about what does enhanced distance learning look like, what does that mean, and then a lot of concern about positive tests and what would we do. So we will be launching more of these thought exchanges, and part of the Listen and Learn tour as we think about planning for the future will allow us to ask open-ended questions that elicit those responses as a substitute for what we would have done in an in-person environment. We can also use other technology like Zoom. We've done a fair number of Q&As with a number of people. We've done Q&A with all 5 learning communities plus the Scottsdale online staff, participated in a couple of Rotary meetings, and there are a number of other groups where we've had those conversations. So while it's not typical, we've been able to do some things in that regard, and there's still 45 more days left to continue listening. But that doesn't mean we stop listening on the 91st day. That's got to be a part of our ongoing communication and connection with the community. The second goal was more specifically around communication. I've never been in an organization where it hasn't surfaced as an important issue for improvement. And so here I want to highlight Let's Talk, and I did give you a quick summary report of where we are. You know, we launched Let's Talk on July 7th when we had our first special meeting. That night, we had more than 300 dialogues that came in. As of earlier this afternoon, we had more than 2,300 dialogues that were submitted. Our customer satisfaction score on a 10-point scale is at 8. The national average is 8.2. What's really interesting about the survey results when we're scored by our customers is that we get a whole lot of 10s and we get a fair number of 1s. I mean, very strong opinions on both sides. And the 1s are really instructive because for those who leave feedback, I can get an understanding of whether or not the 1 was because we were not responsive. In some cases, a dialogue was closed, no response was given, and I would expect a 1. Sometimes people just didn't like the answer. That's another reason to give a 1. And so by diving into the data, we're learning how we can improve our communication and our processes. The other thing that I would point out here is dialogue age, where it says 1.1. The national average is 1.8. And we were over 2 when we started. So this was a new tool for everyone in Scottsdale except me. And so as we've been learning our way into the tool, people have become quicker in responding. We want to have as you know, one of our 4 core values is to be responsive. And this tool is helping us do it and to be accountable for being responsive in a timely fashion. You see there are 51 past due. Those are things that we monitor on a daily basis. Gladys and Joanne help look at that and give a little nudge to the people who have been assigned to dialogue to remind them that it needs a response. The second and third page just provide some demographic information. So 85% of the people submitting dialogues are parents. Almost 10% are employees. Most of them come in as questions, but we have actually received some really nice compliments, some good suggestions that we can use. Most of the people find it through the landing page, but we've got a few that are doing it through the customer app. The other thing that we're able to do is we can forward emails that we get into the system. So my experience has been you can get buried in email. If you send the email to Let's Talk, then it doesn't get lost. And 5 days later, you wake up at 2 a.m. and say, oh, I forgot to respond, because you have a way to track it. So the tool itself does a lot of really good things for us. And you can also see who the repeat customers are. 86% are one-time customers, but we have a few repeat. Then the last page shows you the ebb and flow of dialogues as they come in. And you see, and you don't see the July 7th, 8th, and 9th, which was our biggest spike. First we started and lots of people were interested. But you can see mid-July and then just before we started school where we had some spikes in the number of people submitting dialogues. So I think this is a good start. It's only one of our communication tools, but I think it's an important one in terms of getting to accountability. We're also working on improving our weekly communication with our staff as well as the larger community, and that improvement process will be ongoing. The third area was framed as contingency planning, and so that was where my crystal ball was maybe not as prescient as it could have been, because I was thinking more broadly and didn't anticipate the pandemic was going to have such an impact on this year. So if I was writing the plan now, knowing what I know, that'd probably be number one, because it has consumed a significant amount of time, and it is really the top priority, and will remain so, I think, for some period of time. And then the fourth area is data achievement and accountability. And what I pointed out in the entry plan is that people talk about these concepts all the time, but we don't always mean the same thing. And so getting clarity around what we mean and clarity about having high expectations for all of our students and how we'll know that we're on the journey to get there. So as you know, I encouraged all the board members and also all of Cabinet to read Mark Tucker's book, Leading High Performance School Systems, Lessons from the World's Best. We need to benchmark ourselves not against just those who are around us in the Valley, but across the nation and around the world. And so we need to, in my mind, part of that first 90 days is setting the tone for high levels of expectation, even in a pandemic. When we talked with our staff, we said that COVID's not a reason to lower our expectations. It may shift how we approach learning, and we have some other challenges to address, but we shouldn't lower our expectations for students, because actually our students are pretty resilient and capable of a whole lot more than sometimes we as adults give them credit for. We just have to be prepared to shift in this environment to achieve those desired outcomes, maybe in a different way. The last thing I would point out, because I know that we want to move on to the planning for the goal setting. This 90-day draft plan was before the killing of George Floyd. And had that event happen and the subsequent protest, I would have definitely called attention more specifically. As you know, even in my interviews, I'm committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. It was elevated in a way that brought a sense of urgency that was not reflected in my plan, and I think that's an oversight, and I think it's really important for us to include it in our conversations going forward. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, but that's a quick synopsis of the first 45 days.
Do governing board members have a question regarding an update on the first 45 days? Yeah, Michael.
So moving forward, because I take it that town halls will probably not be possible for some time, are you going to be hosting more virtual town halls with each learning community, the parents and the students, to the best of our abilities, and I guess having multiple sets of them? Is that kind of where we're going moving forward on that front?
That would be my plan. So you do those. I was actually texting with one of my former colleagues in Michigan who has had Zoom town hall meetings 3 nights in a row and had more than 1,000 participants each night. So to Dr. Joel's point, these are hot topics for people. I like the idea if we can narrow into each of the learning communities as a target, it can kind of help us in some respects to chunk it. But yes, both for internal and external stakeholders, I envision that having those kinds of Q&A sessions and town hall meetings will be really helpful.
Patty?
I'm glad you brought that up because it reminded me of something I wanted to ask. All the town halls are important, but I would ask that we really pay a priority, kind of attention to maybe revisiting the teen town halls via like Zoom or virtual or whatever, because those are going to be even more important than they ever have been right now. I mean, kind of gauging how our kids are doing and how they're feeling.
I think that's a really good point. And the other thing that we confirmed with Thought Exchange is that we can launch a Thought Exchange with just the students. And so that gives us it'll still be anonymous in terms of who submits the thought and how it's rated, so it doesn't create an unintended consequence. But we can narrow some of those open-ended questions to get their feedback. And we're hopeful that in that environment we'll get more participation because it is using technology and it's a tool that none of them have used, so maybe the novelty of it might encourage more participation as well.
And I also was going to be the other person that was going to bring up the town teen halls. And just to be a reminder that we started with Arcadia, we went to Saguaro. Desert Mountain was the next one. I personally would like to see that continue, that it's Desert Mountain. And then I believe, it was Coronado and then Chaparral. I would think, but I'm not going to assume anything because it is Zoom, it'll take less logistics so that maybe that we can have them instead of once every quarter or semester. Maybe we could hit all 5 learning communities this year. And possibly, who knows, it might be a good thing to do the first semester since it is Zoom.
Thank you.
So, thanks for bringing up, Patty.
And I don't know when it's appropriate to kind of dive into the formatting of that, but you're talking about launching things specific to kids. It may be interesting or a good idea to send something out before a teen town hall just to gauge levels of interest about where their challenges are, et cetera. Kind of, everyone has survey fatigue, but something like that kind of touches on the hot topics even that we can get our arms around before.
Right. So, and I think there are a couple of vehicles to do that. One, we do have our student advisory board that will reconvene again. And we have students on our diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. So we've got a couple of avenues to be able to engage students to think about what some of those might be. And then we also may be able to use student government and some other vehicles to kind of elevate what the hot topics and issues of concern are.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I will tell you what I was thinking was that we would continue with the same format that we had. Because Dr. Hirsch did attend at Saguaro, and she was already, I believe, engaged some of the students. And so they might have been seniors, but if they haven't, Saguaro used the model of using the student government, and so we can ask Dr. Hirsch. And that I think part of the beauty of the teen town halls is that the students actually took ownership and pretty much ran them. And there's no reason that they couldn't continue with that and keep that model going unless there were problems with it. And then in those, meetings before the actual teen town hall, they did just what you said, brought up some of the concerns that might be raised and to be prepared for them. So,
And I want to stay on agenda, but this is something I think that we need to do sooner rather than later, just because I really would like to hear from our students how this is going, how they felt going into the year, where their stress level is, where the challenge for them specifically.
Right.
okay, Jan Michael?
So you've also, during this time period, taken over, I guess, or taken over kind of the leadership for the Diversity and Equity Committee. With that work and the updates that have been done there, and the surveying of students and using Let's Talk and all these functionalities that we now have, I think it's really important, or critical, I should say, that we do contact everyone throughout all students, which I think is the only real way to do it, because a massive concern from the families and students that I received was kind of what I was saying, that because the committee was formed the way it was formed, it cut out a lot of people who didn't even know it was formed and didn't know how to share their views. And I think getting that student input and getting that family input, especially input from minorities across our campuses who deal with these, perhaps have a very different experience. We can look at our Hanover survey and say 70% of people say everything's great, but that 30% might be a pretty targeted set of individuals who don't think things are okay or that there are issues. So I think it's very clear, and I think you're already on this page, but with everything that was said here, really making sure that our administration is reaching out to everyone, lots of advertising around that topic, potentially reopening applications and allowing people to submit their name to come onto it, because I think we just have such a rich community and they have so many great ideas and frankly concrete ideas for addressing issues that they have faced as students or their parents see that their own children are facing. So I think that's a real crucial element of all of this. Is the teen town halls are great. They were awesome. I wish more students showed up. I think perhaps the timing and the day chosen wasn't great. But in addition to that, I think really targeting these students and really targeting their families, because I think we will be surprised about what we would learn from a larger array.
Thank you for that.
Any other comments? All right, well, Dr. Joel, how would you like to proceed as the facilitator?
All right, well, thank you. So if you would take out your document and go to, I think it'd be page 11. What we're going to try to accomplish two things in the time we have tonight. One, we're going to try to reach consensus, collaborative consensus, on a couple of goals. One or two goals. And that's going to take some combining and some clarifying, kind of what we did with you when we were working on the developing the performance objectives for the incoming superintendent. And then we'll look at evidence, because this needs to be a performance-based process. We'll look at what evidence would you accept that, in fact, this task, this goal has been met. Now, a couple of things I want you to keep in mind before I turn you loose. Remember that for this to work, it has to be these goals have to be mutual, which means that, I'll just give you an example. If a goal were to generate to cut the budget by 10% to provide relief for property taxes, I'm just making this up, then what you have to be able to understand is that you have to support that goal. right? So when we talk about mutually supported, what we talk about is mutual ownership. And so whatever we come up with tonight, I'm going to ask and tell you that that's what high-performing board and administrative teams do. They focus on a goal. They agree to the evidence and what does it look like when it's done, and then they agree to the workflow, which is really the primary responsibility, the action plan, if you will, of the superintendent and superintendent's cabinet. And what I'd like to be able to do, I was talking to Dr. Menzel today, is once we develop this draft, I'd like to wordsmith it over the weekend, get it back to you, because we encourage our boards to adopt these publicly. And that will, that will put everybody inside your district and outside your district as a stakeholder. That'll put them in the game. So they'll know that for the next 5 months, this is going to be the priority work. So questions on process or questions on, what this means before I give you the assignment?
Yes, John Michael.
Well, I was just going to ask, you said 6 months. Is this or what we're focusing on half-year goals, or are they full-year goals?
Well, I think great question, John Michael. I think it depends on your personal perspective. But I think for the most part, you're going to have a whole new team of people in January if folks that are up are not rerunning. And so my conversations with both Allison and Dr. Menzel have been, let's focus on between now and the end of this fiscal year or calendar year, and then, come back and revisit it with a new board. So it's really about what's the priority work between now and then. My guess is that when we put this up on the poster paper, it's going to be the kind of goals that we're going to carry forward for the school year.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Dr. Joel, I do want to have a clarification, because I do know that Dr. Menzel and I did speak, and then I called you. One of the things that came up that these were, whether it was termed priority goals, which is what I think we originally talked about as part of, when we were talking about the search. But actually, when we talked about it, they became more performance goals, which meant they were tied to the contract, which meant they actually had the date of May 30th, because the superintendent would have to meet those performance goals that were set to be able to achieve the performance pay that's set in the contract. So that's one of the things I talked about is we need to clarify that and have everybody be comfortable. We might, and maybe it's that we do some performance goals through May 30th that the new board would most likely just accept, unless they wanted to come in January, February and change them, which I guess maybe is their prerogative. But hopefully they wouldn't, given that the superintendent had been working 6 months already to achieve those. But then maybe there are some additional priorities that would be through maybe December 30th. So that's just an option. I know that throws a little kink in things, but it is what we kind of talked about, and we didn't have an opportunity to have the three of us speak. And so I guess we could ask the board what they think, and I will ask, Patty Beckman has her hand up.
Wouldn't it make sense to establish these goals today and revisit them with the new board in January? I mean, I wouldn't expect that they would be vastly different either, but respectfully, and determine where we are in the process and allow Dr. Menzel to, discuss and take us to where he is in the process and how he feels about moving forward with them. But I would think you would want to revisit them with the whole new board majority, if that is the case.
And if that is the desire of the new board. I think the one thing is to remember that we do have a informal evaluation in December, which we will be having, in which we will be going over these. So they'll have a very up-to-date, because that will be towards the time that school closes, and then that January, typically that first week is when you have your new board coming in, and the old board is completely off. So they will be most likely up to date on what the progress is, and probably I'm not doing too much during the Christmas break, or winter break, excuse me.
Right, and I know they'll be up to date, but my point is there may be a goal in there that someone, for whatever reason, that's new on the board disagrees with, and we would want to give Dr. Menzel the opportunity to either to discuss it and chime in about why he feels that it's a worthwhile goal to keep pursuing, or listen to whatever board members brings up the potential objection to it. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think that is the prerogative of the new board. Would you agree from your experience?
So I would agree. I think there are a couple of things that we're talking about. One, in the contract, there's a date, October 31st, by which the board has to adopt the performance metrics that supplemental compensation is, and there's some statutory requirement in Arizona in terms of what that might look like, but the board's got some broad latitude. That doesn't have to be what we do tonight or this afternoon. We do need to consider it before then, and arguably those metrics, if they shift after they're set, that just becomes kind of difficult, because if you have a moving target, it just raises some questions. That's different than saying the board at this juncture will identify a few key performance objectives, the most important things that you want me to spend my time on. There's the routine, day-to-day, what the superintendent does. We're not worried about that. We're worried about what are the most important priorities. Because if you were to tell me it was, I don't want to even throw out something so that someone thinks that it's actually a possibility, but there can be some things that, so you want to build an athletic complex somewhere, because I don't think that's anywhere on anybody's radar. It could be, but if you were going to say something like that, that would be very different than what I would think the priority is. So my guess is there's not going to be any major surprises, but by identifying the priority objectives, those are the things where I'll spend the bulk of my time, in addition to doing the routine. If they were something different or a surprise, that would cause me to reprioritize. And to Dr. Joel's point, I need board support, because right now, 100% of my time is spent on addressing the COVID situation. And that just is the reality. But that doesn't mean there aren't other things that should be considered, and so we should be talking about when do we begin to engage in some of those other things that are important for the district, knowing that right now the priority is COVID for obvious reasons, but there are other things that are important too. So when do we engage in those, and where are they on the priority list might be a way to frame our conversation about the objectives.
Jan Michael.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I asked, because it's understandable if we wanted to set quarterly or even biannual objectives that we would check up and then revise moving forward. But my concern is that there are objectives that I believe, in many ways, objectives that we had intended on, not with the anticipation of COVID, that are probably pretty important, that we still start working on and chipping away at slowly, because so much of our time is devoted to COVID and making sure that our students are receiving the education they need, that if we set something super small, a small time frame, it might make the objective somewhat meaningless. I think you can't set a really substantial objective specific for a 6-month target and then any objective you were to set. So I think if we set it as kind of thinking of year-long, understanding that with the new board, we would review those to see, hopefully they're objectives that, again, as Dr. Joel pointed out, are things that the candidates or whoever the new board members are support, or the tweaking is very minor, or just tweaking because the environment has changed and those goals are no longer achievable. I think that probably makes more sense than to think of it as like a small time frame, we got to get this done, if that makes sense.
So are you thinking of going ahead and working through some of these priorities that will become the performance goals? Because they are very different. We've got performance goals.
Right.
And in which performance pay is tied to.
Mm-hmm.
And then we could have what you're talking about as more short-term priorities.
Yeah,
So which are you thinking? I'm not quite sure where your line on that is.
I think it's probably, I think they are tied. I think you set the objectives. What are our objectives for the year? What is it that we want to accomplish? And that those are used as a way of evaluating the performance overall. I think probably we would have to set separate performance goals, though.
Right, at a different date.
At a different date. I don't know if we could really.
Although some of those are going to be brought up in this meeting.
Right.
So it's almost.
Well,
well, there's a possibility, I suppose. that-
Yeah, there is a possibility. I guess it really depends on what we mean by, are we just saying that that the performance has been satisfactory on the objectives or overall performance? Because I think the performance goals can be quite much more broad. I mean, it can be about the totality of the behavior and actions and direction and things done, where you're relying on, hey, these were the 3 objectives, here's the progress I made on them, here's what went right, here's what went wrong, et cetera, this is what I learned. That isn't what you're measuring directly as a performance itself, but you're saying, look, he's done all this work and this shows, this and that, and so he's performed well, even if the objective was not accomplished or what have you. So I don't know. It depends it depends on what we think, and I don't want to get bogged down. I know Dr. Joel's time is valuable, but I obviously view objectives as a very specific set thing. So
Versus from, Dr. Joel?
Yes, two observations. So first, every state and every district has their own superintendent appraisal process, right? So this does not replace that. What this does is it augments it with a performance component, which is what you're going to develop today. And when you look at the time frame, because you've got an October 30th deadline, and by contract, performance objectives, performance goals are a part of the overall performance evaluation and compensation. What you develop tonight really should and has to be representative of an entire year. That a new board could very well, and I would encourage them to review with the superintendent once they're seated and they're comfortable, to see if any revisions need to be made, or maybe there's some things on there that they can check off and say we've accomplished. So I think the work tonight is to really look at this thing. This is your obligation. I mean, this is your time to work with your superintendent and create that first set of performance priorities.
Okay. Barbara?
I know I've beaten this drum before, and I'm going to go ahead and beat it again, I think we should move forward, especially tonight, with a very clear understanding of there's goals and there's overall performance, and then there is performance pay and check mark. And I've beat this drum before. We should lay out a checklist of things. Did he accomplish this, this, and this? And if so, he gets this performance pay, because one, we all know it's a very small dollar amount, really, we talk about, but it is state required. So as long as we keep those lanes clear, and I know in the future, our future board will be grateful if, when it comes to did he earn this performance pay, it is a simple yes or no checklist.
Right. No, I
I
understand.
think they'll be grateful for that if we do that.
Yes, they will. But so Barbara, do you think today should be just the first set of those priorities, and we will meet at a different time to discuss the actual performance pay, and as you term checklist, but it will just be clarifying the measurements or how they are achieved. We just need to make sure those are clear so that it can be more or less a checklist.
I think personally tonight, especially considering where our district is right now, we'd be a little tone deaf if we didn't somewhat address the giant COVID elephant in the room as far as our superintendent's goals for the next 6 months. And that'd be overall. And no, I would never tie that to a checklist for performance pay. That's my personal opinion.
Sandy, do you have?
Well, I would
Any
agree. I
comments?
mean, I kind of just want to get down to the nuts and bolts of what it is that we're looking for moving forward. COVID throws a whole, monkey wrench into this whole thing, but doesn't mean that we stop educating our students, so.
Right. Okay.
All right, just we educate them differently in a different way.
Are you, I want to make sure that we're on the same page and that we're hearing the same thing.
Yeah, I think we are. I think that the performance pay checklist, first, we've got time in the contract, and we can revisit that.
Right,
I think identifying what the priorities are for my work, I think there's some merit to saying some of these things are year-long. They can be revisited. But what are the things also that we can identify meaningful progress toward, even if it's not complete, by the end of December, because we've got that interim evaluation before we have the change of the board. So I think it's a both and. We can think about the school year, because that makes sense, recognize that it will be revisited with the new board, and we'll have an update in December. So what would be those signals of progress toward that would meet the board's expectation once we've identified what the priority goals are?
And then we'll meet at a different time to go over the performance pay goals.
Yes.
I think it's the performance goals that got us kind of that hiccup, because that immediately ties it to the superintendent contract. When that term was used, that is what immediately went to, instead of priorities or just objectives. All right, so thank you for letting us walk through that. I think we all have an understanding. I'm seeing heads nod. So Dr. Joel.
Okay, very good. So here's, if you turn to that top of page 11, so I've turned it on this one, or we've termed it performance objectives. So here's the question that I'd like you to respond to just individually, and I'll give you 10 minutes or so to do that. And it is, in addition to the day-to-day operation of the school district, what are the priorities upon which you would like the superintendent to focus? Now, this is very individual. It's based on your own perspective. And so I want you to, I'd like you to keep it between 1 and 3. But before you start writing, keep this in mind. The second part of this is, what is the evidence? If this group tonight were to adopt what you wrote, what evidence would you like to see that would convince you that substantial progress is made toward that objective? Now, we're not going to do that until we decide as a group, where is the collaborative consensus. So for now, let's take 10 minutes and go ahead and just list through what you believe should be the focus areas. Everybody ready to go? Okay. What I'd like to do is, Dr. Menzel, is Gladys in the room?
She is.
Okay. Is there a place for her to do the recording? I'm going to be typing as director speak, but I'm wondering if it wouldn't be a good idea to maybe have some recording there. Okay.
Yes, we got a flip chart and markers, so we should be good to go.
Great. So here's what I'd like to do, Allison, if it's okay with you, is have, and you can call on people. I'd like to change up the rotation a little bit. Whoever goes first on their first one, let somebody else go first on their second one. And then to come up with the priority, and then we'll put it up on the poster board. I'll type it up, and then give her just a brief description of why you've got that as a high priority. And then we'll go to the second board director, and then you can give us one that you've got. And if it happens to be the same or you want to add to it, as long as the person who put it up there agrees that it doesn't take away from the specific meaning, we'll be good to go. And I'll manage a lot from over here too. So don't let this be confusing. So Allison, I'll let you decide who you can just call on, whomever you'd like to go first.
Oh, jeez. Man, you're mean. Okay. All right, so I hope I understand this, and so my priority, performance objective.
One priority.
One priority. Okay, I'm going to combine these two because they go together. Establish an effective way to determine the need in our community for in-person instruction and develop a strategy using the Department of Health's metrics recently provided to bring those students back on campus with safety and a shared understanding of responsibility and expectations as the guiding framework. I know that's really long.
Okay,
Does that mean? I'm so sorry.
Yeah. So what you're
Just-
looking for, let's just paraphrase it so that we can really put it into simple terms. You're looking for an effective way to become more effective in terms of online instruction.
To determining those students in our community that need in-person instruction right now.
Okay. So let's call it that way, Gladys. Determine effective means for students to experience, we'll work on the language later, experience remote or online education. Does that catch it?
So
Look, I'm saying the opposite.
Let me see if I understand it. So it's
We're discussing that at our next meeting, Tim, so I was, that's
not totally.
that's
So
a
what I
given.
hear, let's see if I'm clear.
Okay.
What Barbara is suggesting, that we establish an effective way to determine the need for in-person instruction. So to unpack the need. There are some students who don't have proper supervision at home. There are some students who both parents work, and so they need a place to go. There are some who just really struggle in an online environment. So I think
Learn online.
put
Yes.
put a underscore need, identify those students who need in-person instruction, and then using the health metrics that have been discussed, develop and implement a strategy to prioritize the return to learn in person, focusing on those that have the greatest need. Is that what I heard?
Yes. Wow, that's it.
Sounds like you guys had a conversation before the meeting. That's, so is it really, is it an individualized approach to education based on what students need to be successful, ultimately?
I think that's, yeah, a very broad way to look at it. I mean, considering I took it the intent of the next 5-6 months, what's the priority? That to me right now is a priority that it just, we need to find a way
Okay.
to establish and find those students that we're failing these next few months. That's my priority.
Dr. Joel, is this where do we ask any questions if we have questions?
All right, very good. I think I have it, and I can actually see what Gladys wrote. You did a better job of capturing it than I did.
I'm sorry about that. Do we ask any questions in between, or are we going to go through and just write down all 5?
Let's just go through and get them all recorded, and then we'll come back and we'll clarify and question.
Sandy Kravitz.
Okay, so our tagline or motto, whatever you want to call it, is ensuring all individual learners reach their full potential. So I don't know exactly how to craft what I'm feeling, but I want to focus on academics, special focus on improving outcomes for our Title I students. We've implemented AVID and Discovery Education for STEAM at 2 of our schools, AVID at 2 of our schools. We are in the process of becoming a middle years IB program at Mountainside and IB primary program at Anasazi. I would like to see something to the effect of where are we on the, I guess, the spectrum of implementing those programs, and what are the outcomes that we are seeing to improve academics for those students, as well as our students in the middle. What I call in the middle are just, the students that take our regular courses, I'm talking high school now, and perhaps aren't stretching themselves. So the students that are high-performing students who take the honors and the AP classes, they tend to always do well and be high performers. The students who are special needs students, they get special assistance as well. But what are we doing for our students in the middle and for the students Title I on the other programs that we're seeing? What are the outcomes that we're seeing? How are we helping those students? How are we stretching our students so that they are competitive with their peers in other districts and other states? Again, I don't know. I just spewed a lot of information. But
Sandy, if I can ask a question, are you
Yes.
talking about struggling students, or are you talking
all
about?
students who are not reaching their full potential. That's very aspirational, but I think it can be more than just an aspiration.
Yeah, I got it. So review strategies and outcomes currently in place for all students that are not reaching their potential.
I mean, I don't know if we need to put a percentage on that we'll see a gain of 20% among students on, and I do not necessarily like to hook things to a test score, but that's kind of what we are unfortunately left with. We may not even have tests, which is fine by me. I just want to know that our students are learning when we graduate a student from Scottsdale Unified School District, that they have
So
a strong academic background.
I would caution from putting statistics or metrics to any of these tonight, because I think right now, again, you've got a brand new superintendent that's still trying to learn the land. And so it really, for me, what I hear you say is, you've heard about a lot of things that have been implemented. Are they working?
Yeah.
And if they are, great, and how do we bring them to scale? And if they're not, what are we going to do about it? Because all of our kids deserve the very best that we have. So I'll work on the words on that one.
Thank
That's
you.
a good one. Thank you.
Patty Beckman.
So you've started this, and I know you have, and you've been effective so far, but I would like you to continue meeting with and identifying our community partners, current ones that support them, and identify some new ones. Given this environment, we're likely to have a budget shortfall in the future, so that they can help us identify and support the areas of need, especially as it relates to the learning gap, et cetera, and SEL.
I'm going to have Gladys, watch
So,
Gladys. talk, so she's
Patty, if I
gonna
may,
say
engage
she
with
would
community
do.
stakeholders. As you said, continue, but I think what I'll do is just, I think Dr. Mendel, based on what he was saying earlier, done a pretty good job of doing that. But you want to see that continued, centered on the fact that there's going to be some budget concerns coming up, as well as, I'm sure just returning students to school.
Right, not the stakeholders necessarily, although community partners are stakeholders more than likely. The partnerships that we have through ASU and through the CHAROs and through many of the different support groups that help, they are asking what they can do. And I'd like him to continue meeting with them and providing, guidance and very straightforward, metrics or whatever to say this is what you can do to help our students that are in this environment.
Engage with community partners to obtain feedback and suggestions concerning district challenges.
Correct.
Okay?
I'm just giving Gladys a moment to catch up before we move on to
Get
Mike.
ready.
Speed writing.
I know, for Gladys.
So don't worry. We can be patient. Jan Michael.
Begin drafting 5-year strategic plan. By June 30th, 2021.
Question, John Michael. I heard you, did you say, you don't have a plan right now, right? Or you probably have one that's rotating off?
We do not have one.
We do have
There is
one.
one.
Okay.
We
So-
don't, well,
So can I use
2020.
the word
I see.
initiate this 5-year strategic planning process by June 30th?
well, I mean, well, and so first of all, I would disagree that we have a strategic plan right now, but I would say that initiating, I think, meeting with our partners and meeting with community and these listening are part of that process. So I would view those as what you have described as the evidence of that, whereas this is the objective itself, if that makes sense. So I agree. So, I mean, yeah, we could call it initialize, but I think we've already started initiating that, in my view.
Okay.
Unless, I don't know.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, I got it. And, again, I'll put a better word up there for it, but there's interest in a strategic plan, a comprehensive strategic planning process. Okay, and we'll come back and talk some more about these.
Okay, there's one more. And I kind of took to heart that the day-to-day operations in this environment of COVID is going to be doing what you're going to be doing. So I took it, actually taken some of what has been said, that the data, the student achievement, and the accountability piece that you spoke of in your big theme. And that really is a priority for me. And what not just for me, but from what I'm hearing from our community. We know after reviewing our data that we have, and it's on our website using the past Arizona merits, that academic achievement has not been what we would expect or like. And I have the data here if we need to go into that. We know that because we weren't meeting the expectations of our community, we lost over 7,000 in enrollment. So enrollment decline is still something that is critical not critical, that enrollment decline is not critical, but enrollment is, especially because we are not in a growth demographic. And so given those two areas, student achievement and accountability are my priorities. One of the things I wanted to look at is you are a veteran educational leader, and I would be interested in finding out, and this may go with the idea of a strategic plan, but what actions and supports do we need to take now, especially in light of COVID, because we do know that we had educational decline, most likely in the spring semester. And so we need to know what we can do to support those academics starting, I guess, on last Monday. But so to me, that is a priority. But we need to look at it from a data and an accountability standpoint. I wanted to bring up one item because you brought it up, if I might just go off a little bit of a tangent, and that is, and actually I won't, but I just don't want to forget it, that one of the areas in the 90-day plan you talked about is that the leadership would come up with an assessment that we would have in August. And so I don't want to forget that I would like to have Dr. Menzel talk about that tonight in the theme of student achievement, data, and accountability.
Thank you.
So what I wrote for that, and I'll send these to Gladys because I'm going to still need some help with Barbara. So I'm going to need to see what you wrote down for that first.
You just get
So,
kids back on
nothing to
campus
do.
when we can. How about that? Is that hard? As soon as we can.
Allison, what I wrote was conduct a review of existing academic achievement and present recommendations for improving in all areas.
That works for me, but immediately.
Yesterday.
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. Or anybody else that wants to offer anything?
This is, this is just the
This is just
first.
the first
This was the
round.
first. Are we going to go
Right.
around again and do a second one, or do you want to talk about these first five first?
I think it's important to get them all up there right now,
Okay.
so let's go get the
Okay.
second one.
And since I'm not supposed to start with the same person, I will start with Patty Beckman.
Still digesting all of these too, but jumping off your academic piece, I just wanted to challenge you to bring new innovative ideas and competitive, thoughts that are going on across the nation to us, because I think we've heard it from this board and our community. A lot of times we fall into the same repetitive pattern, but I know it's a broad thing, but I would always welcome some new idea. You've come from out of state, and that's one of the things that we welcome, is not the same repetitive thought pattern and culture. So I would really challenge you to bring that to us as you learn them.
Sandy Kravitz.
I think one thing, we need to have a plan for our building utilization. There may be some tough decisions that need to be made. We're rebuilding schools. We have a combination school at one of our locations right now. I thought we were supposed to have made a determination last spring about what the outcome of that was going to be, but we haven't. And I'll just leave it at that, and I'll speak to you more directly about my thoughts on that. But I think we need to have a review of our building utilizations. We know in some areas we have under capacity still.
Okay.
Jan Michael Greenberg.
Create new organization chart. By January 31st. That's perfect, sorry, that's it. I try and keep them short.
Which year?
Oh, 2021, I would hope.
Good to clarify.
Got it?
Barbara Probert?
Okay, I think mine jumps off Board Member Kravitz's concern as well. Obviously, yes, facilities have been a huge discussion, but as of right now, too, enrollment, obviously, we have to look at it through a new lens, and we don't know what's coming down. I haven't, as a board member, I'll be honest, I haven't even bothered asking what our enrollment numbers are because I can't imagine the roller coaster we've got the last 2 weeks and moving 2 weeks ahead of us. So, but we will need to very soon take a deep dive into our enrollment, what it looks like, and start thinking creatively about how we project what the future years will, what will come and how this pandemic will change possibly our enrollment for a while. So I guess that's facilities / clear new look at enrollment. It's needed.
Thank you.
And I like your goal very much.
So my second goal is, on June 23rd, 2020, the governing board approved policy GCO evaluation of professional staff and members. And in Dr. Joel's responsibilities, it reminded me that one of the responsibilities of the superintendent is to implement all policies that have been approved. And so my next priority is that we implement this policy and assure the effectiveness of our evaluations. I'm specifically interested in the evaluation of other administrators because in the policy it states the format of the evaluation system is developed under the superintendent's leadership. And so and how will the government know it's fully developed and effectively implemented? Second, I'm interested in the overall effectiveness of all of our evaluation processes and timing of our evaluations so they are completed and discussed before contracts are offered. So really, it's the implementation of policy GCO, evaluation of professional staff members.
So Allison, just so I'm clear, because I know you and I had a couple conversations on that. The policy is already in place, so the expectation would be that these appraisals, evaluations are taking place.
Well,
Right, I mean, that's,
a new policy was set, it was amended on June 23rd, 2020. So that is why I'm looking to have that be a priority. With everything else going on, I don't want to get caught in May again and find out that it was not understood or implemented, especially since the timing of our evaluations is so important.
okay. So it's not, you're not really looking for a review
No,
of
not anymore.
the
No.
implementation of the policy. You're looking for
Implementation of the
assurance
policy
that the
we have.
policy is being implemented.
Yep.
Am I right on that, or,
Yes, you're correct.
okay. And what was the policy number again?
It's policy GCO.
And can I clarify one other piece? I heard you say with emphasis on the admin contracts before they come back, before contracts have been offered.
Well, actually, all evaluations to make sure the timing is correct.
Well,
But the
so
admin-
we have a problem on the teacher evaluations because they won't be complete because we don't have the data that's required in those.
And
And
so-
so you can do all the other components, but they won't be finished before contracts are offered because the state doesn't give us.
And that's what I want part of to be evaluated. And see if that's the best way, if that's effective.
But
So I don't know yet.
Well, as I understand, though, we don't have, I think the state has established a certain part of teacher performance that's got to be tied to student test data. That's what we don't have. We don't have latitude to do something other than that, as I understand it in statute, and we don't get the results of that until after contracts have to be issued.
But that's results-based
I think what
performance.
she's saying
does
is
not
that
have to do with the
that we could
evaluation. That
issue
has to do with
contracts
pay.
after that point in
Are you-
time. I think that's what she's
About the
asking to be
tool?
We wouldn't be able
evaluated.
to keep teachers if we wait.
No,
I
no,
understand,
there's a
but that's what
difference
she's
there.
asking
Are you,
to be evaluated.
okay, are you talking about the tool that we use to evaluate, or just
Well,
policy?
there's two things. One is in this new amendment that we made, that it states that the superintendent's leadership is to develop the evaluation system. So we need to make sure that that has been developed and it is being implemented, because we don't know that. The second piece is looking both as for all staff, is that evaluation tool that we use, and can we evaluate prior to giving out a contract? You're correct in that my understanding is also that we have a kind of supplemental piece that is tied to test scores, and that's due to payment. But we have teachers that actually leave, that is determined, and they still get their pay. So I'm kind of looking at it, just making sure that that evaluation of our teachers is an effective part of their overall evaluation
Right.
when we issue contracts.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, I think I can differentiate. So just to make sure I understand, there's an evaluation process of teachers. There's a statutory requirement related to data as a component of that. But what you're looking at is, we recognize that there's the data component, but are the other aspects of that evaluation system effective? The concern would be not so much a complete evaluation, recognizing that that data component might be lagging, but is the other component over which we do have control and can manage, is that effective in determining our teachers performing at a level that's acceptable? Is that fair?
Correct.
Okay.
Patty Beckman.
Okay?
So I'm making sure I understand that because I know, I agree with you. It's essentially, can we develop this or look at this to where the majority, if not all, of the evaluation is done before issuing a contract? We know that piece is out there, but we have had an issue with things not being done or looked at until a contract has been issued. And if there is a way, we'd like to look at this again and develop the way. Does that make sense?
No, I have it. I understand the nature of the problem that we're trying to solve, so.
Dr. Joel?
Yes, I'm trying to capture
Catch up.
this. All right, so what I wrote was ensure that policy GCO evaluation is effectively implemented and completed to the degree possible prior to the issuance of professional contracts. Necessary, offer suggestions for policy revisions in order to match up with expectations.
Good start, yeah.
Anybody else?
I think we have one more set, is that right?
Did did people write down a third?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Then I will
I've got
start. Michael.
Can we give him
I
a
only
little
did two.
break, for goodness sake?
John Michael Green.
I think you said to,
We're only going to do two of them.
Oh, okay.
Three at the most. If you
Yeah.
can't combine into two.
Do
yeah, I
you-
thought it was two or
I
three.
don't have three, but if you have a third, anybody have a third that feels compelled, then I will call on you. Jan Michael Greenberg.
Design 5 initiatives addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion issues at SUSD by June 30th, 2021.
Gladys, could you just step to the left, your left for a sec?
Sandy Kravitz?
Well, I'm going to first ask you, we have transportation already, we will be discussing that, or should I mention that as one of my, because I've got two, so I believe we are.
Well,
So, okay, so one of
mentioned
mine is,
put it up.
well, this, I guess I could put it under the umbrella of fiscal efficiencies or economic efficiencies, and transportation would fall under that. And also, this may be one that you've mentioned before, so you can help me craft what I mean also under fiscal efficiencies or economic efficiencies. Having a better understanding, or I should say, reduce the gap between what we budget for salaries and what we actually pay in salaries. Because every year that we have a budget carry forward, where we say this is how much we spend on salaries for teachers, but then due to retirements, turnover, people leaving, people coming in, and they come in at different levels, what we actually spend for salaries and what we actually budget may be, there could be a significant gap. So if we can tighten that gap, or reduce the gap, not tighten, excuse me.
I got it.
Patty Beckman?
I don't have another one, I just have a question. So please give me clarity again. Were these supposed to be for December, for the year, priorities, or like, because I'm hearing short-term stuff, I'm hearing longer-term stuff. I want to be clear for people that are listening, what the expectation is and what we're trying to focus down to.
Well, and I believe what we kind of did was just throw out some ideas right now, and Dr. Joel's going to help us to clarify those and set them into the parameters that he's established. I'm not trying to not answer your question, but it's kind of a messy process in a way to begin with just throwing out priorities.
Patty, I think it's going to vary based on how these get written. For example, I've got conduct, I've got study, develop, bring forward. I think there's going to be a timing mechanism to each one of those that's going to vary. But I think we need to have the full conversation and kind of see how these get combined.
Okay. I'm hoping we end there. I mean,
No,
we
I
don't
know,
end
I know.
this conversation, but I mean, this comes together in the end that there's a concrete understanding. And my point was only because I completely agree, and these are all great suggestions, but we start with focusing on COVID over here, and then we're developing plans. So we're far out, so I just wanted to have an understanding of where our arms are going around from the time frame perspective. So hopefully we'll get that
I
ferreted
think
out
we're
in
gonna
the
get there
conversation.
next. That's the goal.
Do we have them all?
Anybody else?
I'd like to add, get some sleep in a while. There's a goal for you. I
like that
Lay
one.
that out for you.
Thank you, Barbara.
It's allowed.
Gladys, can I send you my Word doc? Can I email that to you? And do you have a way that you can put it up on a screen or match it up with what you have? I think we're pretty close. Why don't you flip the page over to the first page that you have? Okay. I really simplified yours, Barbara, at your suggestion. Develop sound strategies for students returning to school.
Well,
All right.
Let me just be clear, guys, for community, whoever's listening. To me, what we've learned these last few weeks is starting this Monday, day one, there is a group of our students we are failing with our online, with our EDL. And we know it's not going to be perfect. We know it's messy, and we were waiting from the state. Those are very real issues. But now it seems critical that we figure out a way to determine those groups of students right now we are just losing. And in this next month or 2 months, however long EDL lasts, we're failing them. And to me, we need to start, when you talk about return to learn, you need to start with those students and and I may be jumping ahead, but obviously what we've learned with the state, we have red, we have green, we have yellow, and the priority for those students who we're failing right now, we need to look at that yellow category and find a way to make sure we're determining the needs of those students and we're figuring out how we can serve them on our campuses safely. I hope that brings a little more clarity to it.
That does.
Thank you.
Okay. And I think every district in the country is looking at that right now too. So I think it's just a matter of reaching agreement on what the terminology is.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let me read these, and while Gladys is there, we can just, you can see what she's got on her board. Great job, Gladys, thank you, and this is wonderful that I can actually read over your shoulder. So we'll just number these because we're going to be doing some combining and clarification. Wow, that's even better. Thank you to the tech person. So the first one is develop sound strategies for students returning to school safely and addressing the existing learning gaps brought on by the pandemic. Second one, review strategies and outcomes currently in place for all students not reaching their potential. Third, engage with community partners to obtain feedback and suggestions concerning district challenges. Fourth, initiate a comprehensive 5-year strategic planning process by June 30, 2021. That's a big job too, by the way, and I'm sure if you haven't gone through a strategic planning process, that takes every bit of a year and most would suggest 18 months. 6, conduct a review of existing academic achievement and present recommendations for improvement in designated areas. Or identified areas, I should say. Next one. Bring forward innovative strategies concerning improving the achievement of for all students. I think the comment was Dr. Menzel's experiences in Michigan put him in position to maybe take the best of what Michigan's doing and see how applicable it is to Arizona. In preparation for difficult financial challenges, provide timely financial and facility planning updates. Next one is develop a new organizational chart by January 31, 2021. Next one is conduct a study of current and future enrollments as they relate to district planning. The next one is ensure that policy GCL evaluation is effectively implemented and completed to the degree possible prior to the issuance of professional contracts. If necessary, offer suggestions to policy revisions to align with expectations. Next one was, if I got this right, design 5 initiatives addressing equity, diversity, and inclusion by June 30th, 2021. And then the final one is reduce the gap between what is budgeted for contracted salaries and what is actually spent. Okay, so comments or questions on that? So we've got, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So you got 12 potential priorities that you've come up with. These are all high on your mind. So I know Dr. Menzel might be sitting there going, surely I'm not going to have to produce evidence for all 12 of these. Quite a few of these are going to be ongoing work. But again, in fairness to you, Superintendent, and the work ahead, let's see if we can't focus on 1 or 2 of these, probably 2, that capture that's going to get to the broadest number of these concerns. And I think it's really pretty clear that a lot of these are going to carry over into the next school year, because whether you identify Barbara as number 1 or not, the reality of it is, the work's going to have to be spent on what is it going to look like when students are coming back. And there's going to be, we're all going to get smacked in the head on that one because there's a lot of learning depth. So, okay. So Gladys, we've got 10 there. Can you maybe put those up on a wall or so that directors can see them side by side? And while they're doing that, before we do any combining or clarifying,
Oh, wonderful.
would you like to talk about anything that's on that list? Any questions you have, anything that you want to mention, maybe make a better argument for what you put up there?
Okay. Patty Beckman.
I just want to clarify something. First, I thought it was a little bit more short-term, but just so we have clarity, when I was talking about our community partners, I didn't mean to get feedback. What I meant, and maybe I didn't articulate it correctly, was that we have many, many community partners that provide support to our school district via funding or other means. And they have been reaching out saying, we know you're going to need help. We know you're going to need dollars. We know you're going to need tutoring. We know you're going to need before and after care. There are many avenues that they have said, how can we help you? Dr. Menzel has been meeting with them and listening to them. I'd like him to continue that because the need is only greater. So it really wasn't reaching out and getting feedback from them. It was him meeting with them and saying, these are the concrete areas where you can help us, either with dollars or something else.
Okay, so I'm going to change the wording on that since it's your item. Engage with community partners to obtain support concerning district challenge. Does that sound better to you, Patty?
Yep, thank you.
Okay.
Sandy Kravitz.
I just wanted to say that I think what I was saying with regard to academics meshes with what Allison was saying. Allison was just better at articulating it, so we can combine that. There was no discussion, we didn't have any discussion about implementing a community survey, which I know we've discussed, or I should say surveying our community members who either have not chosen Scottsdale Unified School District or removed their children from Scottsdale Unified School District. And I don't know if that fits in anywhere or that's more of a short-term thing. That I don't know if we want to make that a performance objective or not. I'm interested in your feedback on that.
Jan Michael.
And also, I should say teachers too. Why do they choose Scottsdale? Why don't they?
The
Why do
exit
they?
strategies.
An exit
Exit interview.
We don't do those, so that's important.
Jan Michael.
I agree. I fully agree with that. I think the reason I put forward, the ones I put forward, is because a lot of these, in my mind, are very much either day-to-day things that we're doing. So for example, establishing a system to evaluate need for students is absolutely critical. I think we all agree with that. That's a really good priority. However, we are having a meeting on the 18th to deal with, to discuss that, and our administrative team is already working on that with subcommittees, and there are other aspects. And then on the other hand, I feel that a number of these are things that fall within the broader objectives. So for example, in my view, capacity, so buildings, whether schools need to be closed, addressing enrollment, all of that, those are all things in my view quite rightly fall under the work that is undertaken to develop a strategic plan. You can't develop that without doing all that work. So I guess it really depends if we want to focus on individual aspects of greater objectives or focus on setting out those overall objectives and then inputting these elements as the evidence shown to get there, to get to that point. And I agree. A strategic plan, that's why I said begin drafting in a year. I mean, it's a very long process. It's a 1 to 2 year process. If you've read this book, that substantiates that. So I didn't say have it done. Just begin. That's what we're moving towards by the end of the year, is really starting to finalize all that. So that was how I perceive objectives, and then the subsets are many of these things that you have each pointed out as evidence, as the key results to get there, if that makes sense.
Anybody else want to weigh in on any of this?
I'll weigh
What
in.
I'd like to do now then, with your permission, is let's go look at that list again. There's 12. And what can we combine that has similar meaning to create an overarching general objective? Because I think Jan Michael's right. I think there are some strategies up there that, certainly fall under some of those categories.
And I'll just interject here, because I was going to just add to what Jan Michael said. I would agree with you. I think the idea was just let's put out everything that we hear, and then we'll do that. I am, and we could go individually one by one. I will say, I think that Barbara brought up a point that I don't think maybe is in, and I want to find out if you're correct, if I'm hearing correctly. It's not just the need for the in-person. It's actually making almost a priority list, because we may not be able to take back everybody all at once. We might have to be doing a hybrid. And then I think what you were talking about was establishing a way of making a priority list based upon that student need.
Exactly.
Because there are students out there that, if you had a priority list, would benefit greater by coming back sooner. And so I think it's almost that hybrid model that she's speaking of, which then I would go to, I would say that is something that I believe is being done, but Mr. Menzel, or Dr. Menzel, would have to talk about it.
Well, and I would say, and yeah, I have the benefit of having sat on a particular committee where this was already discussed, so I'm a little ahead kind of in those concerns, but I think it is critical that, and I appreciate the clarification, because that is exactly what I mean. It's one thing to say we want our schools open. Everybody's saying that. It is another thing to shift to a priority of, we have to look at the groups of students right now. As good or as good as it gets EDL is, and we know their success stories, and we know students some of them are going to thrive just fine in it. But we also know there's groups of students that can't, for whatever reasons. And if we're not right now identifying them, and we just kind of wait until we are all back in person, it's very scary to me, the number of students. We won't get back, and I don't even mean in the sense of back as students in enrollment. I just mean back as students who can even begin to reach their potential. And so if we don't start to identify those right now, and rather than just keep saying, we want to come back, there is a strategic plan to work on in prioritizing the students who need it the most, and then finding a way to use our facilities to get them back safely, so where they can learn. So that's my goal.
Is it helpful to find out if we are already doing that? Because if we are, then would it be a priority that we would be, I mean, if we're already doing it in our day-to-day operations within this COVID umbrella, then that would be one we would take off, wouldn't it?
I mean, yeah.
I think it's the difference between PV saying we won't come back till we're all in the green, and
That's a
Queen
discussion.
Creek saying.
Maybe the
I think
But that's what I'm
be
trying to say.
a little bit careful here, guys.
is I'm
Yeah.
trying to.
Michelle's not
would
here.
be-
We did
No,
not
Michelle.
post for this
Michelle is here.
discussion. Oh,
Michelle is
Michelle,
here.
and I don't want our community to look at the agenda that we have tonight and not see any discussion about return, or EDL returning and all that kind of stuff, and be upset because we didn't have it on the agenda. I understand what you're saying, that it should be a priority within that, like that we identify the learning gap, if you're saying the kids that are falling behind. But I just caution that we don't get into any discussions tonight with regard to any plan that may be presented and metrics behind
But
that.
that's
We're
why
not.
I presented it as
As
a
a
top
priority.
priority goal tonight.
Right.
That's
Right.
why I.
So the question is,
So that was-
will we be discussing that on the 18th, and is it a priority, or is it something that we're first learning about?
So,
And it
yes,
should be a-
we will be discussing on the 18th. It's on the agenda and will be discussed in depth, and it's a priority. I think the point of differentiation is, to what extent do you believe that the COVID challenge is going to be with us for the full school year, and how much of the time and energy of the superintendent and the leadership team is going to be consumed by that versus other priorities. And if at the end of the year, when you step back and evaluate my performance, is it going to be based on how we navigated the COVID crisis, which has consumed a lot of time, or is it going to be on something else that was secondary to that, so that if I'm forced to make a choice between dealing with the immediacy of COVID and or the priorities, as a superintendent, my goal is to meet the performance expectations that you as a board set. So it's kind of a both and. Yes, but if you don't make the response in some capacity part of a priority goal, and you set some other things out there, I will attend to what you put out there. And if then you're not happy with the COVID response, to Dr. Joel's point earlier, if it's important to the board, we own these priorities. So then if you're saying that what we really should be talking about is the Granite Reef Corridor versus COVID response, those are two very different topics. And that's why having clarity on the front end is important, because we don't want to get to May and then say, well, wait a second, you majored in the minor things instead of the major.
Yes, but we also are this is where that confusion comes in. Some of these may end up being the performance goals, but that's not what we're talking about today. That's how I thought we established it to begin with. So it could end up being, but tonight we are talking about those shorter term priorities. Is that correct? Jan Michael.
It's actually, that's pretty much I entirely agree with that. It's in part why I set very long-term, probably what will end up being 1 to 2 year, 18-month goals, as Dr. Joel said, because I think it's pretty clear we probably won't have a massive change, other than in Arizona, the rates might have decreased to a point, at least, especially in our area where it is safe to return to school. But COVID will still be an issue. And I agree that was a separation, that we're choosing, I'm going to just say, objectives and key results versus your performance objectives, because, again, I know I beat on about this OKR system, but that is actually a very significant distinction, which this system kind of follows, which is we can set an objective here, in my view, quite honestly, which is, okay, we want you by the end of June of next year to have these 5 or 3 or whatever, these 5 new initiatives to deal with diversity and inclusion issues on our campus, as an example, right? And you could come back and say, look, here's the situation with COVID, blah, blah, blah. This is a really important, very important objective in the key results. We just weren't able to reach them because time management on this, everything's going to have to be delayed. So I want to continue that for the next school year. I was only able to put forward 1. In the OKR system, which this pretty much follows, and especially since we've separated performance objectives from just these objectives, in my view, that would not be something held against you, nor would I want to hold that against you, because the whole point of this system, in my view, is that we're setting out our priorities. The hope is that we're accomplishing them to 60 to 70%, but if we can't, there's a reason why. And if it's a reason that, if the reason is I was very lazy, which I doubt is going to be the reason, that's a bad reason. But if the reason is, look, COVID has extended far longer than we expected, these objectives, some of the evidence, in my view, some of the evidence-based things, like we did review the statistics on score results, and we think we can improve it by this, and we can bring in new initiatives. Some of those might be accomplished, but the overarching objectives that are maybe year-long or maybe those do not get fully completed. That's why I presented such broad ones, because I'm very worried if we set really tiny objectives, like having a meeting on this issue. That's an evidentiary, that's a fact that leads to the objective. And I don't want to reverse that, because then I feel that you do run into that risk of, well, I wasn't able to do this little thing, and I wasn't able to do this or this. So that's my view.
No, and I respect that. I will say, I don't think anybody's put just a meeting, though. I mean, I
No,
think
I
probably the
understand.
shortest term one is number one, because that is an immediate need, and it would have to be done in a very short-term basis. And I'm glad it was brought up as a priority, because I don't know that it's been publicly thought of as breaking it down to those particular students who are at a greater need to get back in the classroom. Maybe it has, but we just haven't had the public session. I believe that public discussion will be coming on the 18th, but it still is a priority. And to me, the question is, and I think you go through each one, and I'm getting to your point, because some of those do fall under the strategic plan, but is that already being done? And therefore, it doesn't need to be one of these, because it will be a short-term priority that might be fixed in the next 30 days. I don't know. That's why we're having the discussion. Everybody else might agree with you, Barbara, that it needs to be a priority for that very reason. So, and that's maybe what we think.
I completely agree with identifying the children, the students that are at risk and are falling behind that we're going to lose as a priority. I just wanted to caution us to have that discussion center around that and not to get into any of the reopening, metrics or guidelines or data. And because there is a committee, and Barbara, in full disclosure, is on it, and I am on it, and since we didn't have that on the agenda tonight, you aren't on it, so I didn't want anyone to accidentally go in there into that discussion. I just wanted our priority discussion to center around what I think was your point, which is those students, and not to center around or accidentally go into a territory that we're going to be discussing on agenda Tuesday night.
Thank you. Cindy Kravitz?
I just wanted to remind some of us that back in the not-so-distant past, when we were discussing goals, et cetera, when we originally got on the board, and this goes to your point about how will you be evaluated, there was a discussion of showing what the superintendent was working on, whether red, and there was a graph showing red, whether nothing's been done, yellow, in process, and green, completed. So, and the idea behind that was to keep the board apprised of what was going on. And that kind of fell by the wayside recently, so that the board didn't know what was occurring. So I think, to your point about, well, are we working on COVID, are we working on if we know that things are in process, that it may not have been completed, but if it's in process, we will at least have an understanding, and that will work towards your review.
Can I suggest another way of maybe framing this that could help us? So when I look at what you put up here, there is a student achievement aspect of our focus that resonates through any number of these, including the how are we going to prioritize students in need, to our diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation. So it seems to me that there is an emphasis on student achievement, ensuring that each fulfills their full potential. It's important for the district. If you are a school district and you do not have an achievement goal, then I don't know why you're in the school business. So one, I think the overarching umbrella would be student achievement. There are a lot of specific indicators underneath that can help us identify what do we need to know, what are we doing about it, what's working and what's not working, even the evaluation metric, right? Because ultimately, we know that teachers play the most important role outside of the family in terms of supporting student achievement. So all of these things feed into an overarching student achievement goal. So that would be one. Secondly, we can't do the work of being a high-performing public education system if we're not tending to the financial realities in front of us. So if your second area of focus is financial as an umbrella thing, you can put some other pieces on there. Now, you might not, on Michael's point, you might not be able to get to everything, but you have a structure for framing how do these two sides of the coin fit together. If there's a third piece, it's really setting out that long-term vision for where we're going. So to me, I want to begin to create that destination picture of what Scottsdale Unified School District looks like 10 years from now. How do we ensure that we are a high-performing district that competes with anyone around the globe? And there's a long process to do that, so this notion of getting started on the journey is important. But to me, maybe the way we avoid, getting into the weeds on some of these others is think about the academic and the financial as two pieces of the core. We can then talk about what's the evidence. And then the third piece is really a commitment to starting on this journey.
Yep.
Just a potential way of
I
framing it.
agree.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
And I agree. And I think that one of the points bringing up is that strategic plan. And that, I think, is a priority. I do think it needs to start now. But I actually think of it as being more of that performance goal because we know how long it takes. But knowing it's going to be starting now because the gathering process needs to happen in the next 6-7 months because some of it possibly could happen. And therefore, when the new board comes on, you're going to be kind of ahead of the game because you're going to have some of that data and information.
Yeah, I think the dichotomy is not problematic. What I will say is that as board members, we tend to ask for, or we spend a lot of time discussing specific, measurable, objectively measurable objectives and results. And what we end up doing, in my view, is often creating objectives and their key results that aren't measurable, and then not very happy that they're not accomplished. So, if we talk about data-driven decision-making, I don't know, or statistics, Dr. Joel actually said not to use statistics at this point in time just because it's so early in the game and we have a brand new administration and all that. But what you would want eventually is to say, increase, this student body, whatever that description is, their performance on AIMS by 5%, something that is measurable.
Sure.
Because we often then say, well, this isn't measurable. Well, of course it's not measurable because we didn't set it up to be measurable. So, that's we all, it's just kind of a routine we fall into that I want to avoid. So in these objectives, if we break them, if we want to fast track this by saying, okay, look, the key things are focus on academics, focus on finance, focus on strategic vision. It's okay if I can't hold up the board. So if the majority, if we're on the view that, okay, we're going to just set generic, these are the areas, and then we're going to toss these into them as the measurements. I would just system still during this time, but there's so many reasons why performance could drop off at this time that is representative of the general trend of our district, et cetera. So without baselines and without specific measurements, I find it really hard to just create objectives and their results in the way that we've done it. So I would hope that as we finish this process with Dr. Joel, that we keep that in mind and actually think of how can we frame this in a way that we can say, okay, so we're this is something we're actually moving towards, a specific goal we're moving towards, and this is how we're measuring it.
And my understanding is because there's 2 points to this, and they are that we actually do the measurements, and then actually there's an action plan that is set out that we know about. Is that correct, Dr. Joel? So it's not just
It is.
making, having these priorities set. There are 2 other components to it that actually answer Jan Michael's questions.
Yeah. One of the things that's clear to me is because you've not gone through a comprehensive strategic planning process, you're trying to do that now. And when you do go through that process, every year you will have goals updated with metrics and measurements and indicators, and that will have broad-based community buy-in, and that's going to be your guiding light for all the work going forward. And so I really, what I want to get you off of is doing the strategic planning work today and really figure out, you've got a first-year superintendent who's got a lot of zeal, a lot of energy, wants to do the right thing, and he's drinking through a fire hose right now. I can just imagine what that's like. And what do you want this person that you just went through a very, very, you went through a great process to get the right superintendent, to focus on, so that not only do you take care of the immediate needs, you then put yourself in a position to think about long-term needs. And I do agree that you just don't have a strategic plan. You've got to go through a comprehensive process. That's going to be your organizational plan going forward. And what you'll end up doing is quarterly, you'll review your strategic plan. And you'll measure yourself on, did you increase academic achievement for all students by 2% or 3%, or graduation rate, or enrollment trends, and all of those things will be in your plan. Diversity, inclusion, and equity. That'll be part of your strategic plan. You're not going to get that done between now and January 1st, nor are you going to get it done between now and the end of the year. And I do agree with Dr. Menzel. I think there's 3 overarching themes that have emerged here. And that is to work on planning, to work on your coming back to school plan, and then, looking at, your fiscal and your some of those realities. So I think what you have up here, quite frankly, is very good stuff. And I know Dr. Menzel is going to keep that in mind as he goes forward, because these are all action items. But can we boil it down to 2 overarching focus areas that he can go to his teams with and basically say, okay, the priority work is this. This is where we're going to have to, on a monthly basis, give an update to the governing board on our progress in these areas. So that's, as you look at that list, can you combine it? Can you agree with what Dr. Menzel put out there, that there basically are 3 strategic areas?
So I'd like to hear from the board members. Does anybody want to raise their hand first? Sandy Kravitz.
Well, I think what Dr. Menzel said, he condensed our priorities to 2, I think it was 2, major areas, efficiencies and, academics. So I think we can put some of those, they can be combined, but what we've come up with, the 12 items, fit under those 2 umbrellas.
Thank you. Barbara? Any comment? You don't have to.
Well, it's just, again, I mean, I am thoughtful with the idea of, our purpose here tonight. What are we saying to our community right now, especially in this time? To leave here tonight and say our priorities are fiscal responsibility and academics, I guess. I mean, obviously they are. I like the details we've laid out. I get it, 12, that's a lot of goals. That's plenty to focus on. I guess I'm just not understanding the question. Are we trying to decide how to present it, or to narrow it down more from 12 to 3? I guess is my question.
Dr. Joel?
I would say narrow it down to 2 or 3 overarching broad-based goals, and then let Dr. Menzel and his team come up with those action strategies that'll meet those goals. And then you, as a board of governors, working with him, provide timely updates on it.
Patty Beckman?
So I feel like what you said makes a lot of sense. And narrowing it down to 3, to kind of jump off what you said with academics and fiscal responsibility, absolutely. But before that, to Barbara's point, and I guess this could fall under academics, but we have academics in general because we do educate. We have a very big priority, which is determining those that aren't being served well right now. So I think that's almost a precursor, academics, to the academics. So it would be points for me from a priorities perspective is A, determining those children that we aren't serving well right now. 2, focusing on academics overall. 3, fiscal responsibility, to Sandy's point, et cetera, and even to my point about reaching with the community partners to help us support those areas of need. And that kind of goes back to, and the fiscal responsibility as well, serving the academic need. And then finally, those drive into creating a plan. So that's kind of how I see this conversation being molded, because I agree with you on Michael. That has to be one of the biggest priorities, because these all fall underneath that.
If I may, just with the, if we want to do that, I'm very happy to do that, and put those three up, the categories that Dr. Menzel put forward, and then allow them to move these types of things within them and do that. The reason why the COVID issue is not something that I put up as an objective is because we have to do that. That isn't, like, we don't have to do a strategic plan because we've not done one for decades. So, we have to perform well on Dr. Menzel, and to Dr. Menzel's point, I don't want to distract from that with certain things. At the same time, I don't see the point really in spending much more time on this topic if what we really want to do is just set objectives that are either already being worked on or are definitely on the radar. I don't think there's a single administrator in our district who is not very cognizant of the fact that we have many students for whom EDL is not a sufficient option, who aren't also students at need under the governor's definition of needing to, just a place to be, a safe place to be. I don't think that is being ignored, and it seems like, based on comments made, that is being looked at already, as far as I was aware, the gaps in education caused by the last semester, losing pretty much most of last semester and starting here. I believe our teachers are working on that. So it's up. I don't really have a dog in the fight really at this point, because I'm very clear about these objectives and how they all mold into what Dr. Menzel's been talking about. But if we're going to set key objectives that are beyond that go beyond academics, that, and focus on, I think they can probably do that on their own. I don't know if we really need, as Dr. Joel said, I don't really think we need to go beyond this. If we're all on board of saying, okay, objective is academics, objective is fiscal responsibility, objective is vision planning, that's fine. It's just the COVID thing is being, that's their day-to-day. That is what they do day-to-day. So I don't know if I guess it's a difference between saying, in my mind, do I want to set something that isn't necessarily the day-to-day, but is a long-term thing, versus just setting something that's day-to-day. I would imagine that the exit surveys and the entrance surveys, all these things we've been talking about for years, are things that we are looking into and have made big strides on. The Let's Talk and all this are really great new programs introduced, and I've heard really good feedback about them. So, we are working on a lot of these aspects.
Patty Beckman?
Well, and that's I hear your point, and that's why when we originally started this, Dr. Joel, I was a little bit confused because your question did say in addition to the day-to-day operation. So there was an assumption on my part when I started drafting, what I was going to say is, I know what a superintendent and leadership team is supposed to be doing every single day. What, as a board member, could I see that they could do as an aside to that would make us better? So that's where my mind went. And then beyond that was, are we talking short term? Are we talking long term? So it was a little bit unclear as far as I'm concerned about what we were trying to establish today. I don't know if anyone else wants to.
Yeah, that's how I took it, was in addition to, because on the day-to-day we're working on all these COVID-related things, but then, we also do have, if we're going to make any changes to the organizational chart, maybe that is being done day-to-day. I don't know. I imagine that right now everyone is so much in the hustle of, making sure everything's being covered, all aspects, that, focus on the grander issues that we would have been focusing on were it not for COVID. I don't know if that's been dropped off. So maybe if anything, if Dr. Menzel would like to propose 2 or 3 objectives to us as the overarching in a specific phrase, and maybe we could say, that captures what we're looking for, and go from there. Is that a fair thing to do, to see if?
Okay, just one moment, if you don't mind. Before you answer that, can we get some feedback? Patty Beckman.
Okay, just one last thing, because then I'll let everybody else talk. To your point, though, I have to go back to this COVID thing for one more second, just because I would have an assumption that that's something we would be doing every day too, because Dr. Menzel did say 100% of his time is being focused on that. But as a board member and as a parent, I have yet to hear or understand. I'm assuming that the learning gaps will be addressed. I'm assuming that we're trying to identify those kids by the executive board. We have our camps going and whatnot. but I haven't really heard it as a board member. Like, what is our plan for identifying those gaps? What financially are we going to be putting in place? Are we going to be bringing in tutors after school? Are we going to be doing more things like we do at Coronado right now for like Rise Hour and that type of things to work with these kids? I don't know what that plan is, or if things of that plan are outside of our teachers working miracles. I don't know what we're actually doing. So I agree with you that I have an assumption that that should be in your day-to-day, because that's your world right now. I would like to understand, and I think our community would like to understand too, that if there are kids struggling and falling behind, that we do have a plan, that not only are we putting in place now while these kids are in EDL and we're trying to identify them, but that when they do return to campus, that they're going to have significant support to identify where they are and meet them there and catch them up. So that's my last thing.
And I'll just follow up with that, because part of what I was speaking about is, even though we say we're working on student achievement, I've been 3.5 years and I've been waiting for those conversations for how do we measure it? Because what we've known is that if you look at our data that is presented to us, which is Arizona Merits, it shows that when you're in elementary school, we're doing really well. And you fall down in middle school, and by the time you hit high school, you're at 40 to 50% of the kids that were failing, that aren't passing it. And so we are passing kids out of Scottsdale's Unified School District that aren't meeting, that we're not meeting their needs to be career and college ready. And it is a priority for us, especially in COVID, to start meeting those needs, to start identifying them, start understanding and identifying the data that we need, that growth data. Because it's probably not just the district aggregate number, it's really the individual, because therefore we're identifying those kids that we really need to shore up and give more support to. And how are we doing that? So it is, part of it's communication, but part of it is too identifying those data points, those growth points. How many kids is it? So that we can start to see that we are not failing so many of our kids. So that's why it's a priority for me. And it is different from what we've had.
May I interject for just a second? Isn't it fair, though, to give your superintendent an opportunity to gain a better understanding of the things that you put up on the board tonight, so that, as opposed to what you believe to be true, and please don't be disrespected by this, and I get what Allison just said about 3.5 years, and I've just not gotten what I need out of this, so there's a sense of urgency. But you hired a superintendent where that was one of the priorities, that you told us to go find somebody that knows how to be an instructional leader. And so isn't it not fair to give him an opportunity to I'll just use the word audit, but develop a comprehensive understanding of what the data is? You can't do that in 45 days. You can't do that in 90 days. And you definitely can't do it when you're trying to work through a pandemic. And so I really like the idea of a broad overarching goal that is, immerse yourself in gaining an understanding of where we stand academically for all students, so that we can become, and I heard Dr. Mendel say it before, a world-class school district as good as anybody in America or the world for that matter. But the goal isn't get there and get the designation. The goal is to learn about it, understand it, so that you can begin bringing some forceful strategies to the table. The same thing about fiscal responsibility. My guess is that from the minute he came, well, I know when I was doing the recruiting, and I said there's a real concern there about loss of students and the financial impact that's going to have on the long-term budget and as it plays out in facilities. But I'm not sure that in 45 days you can really get a grasp for that. And I think you need to give your superintendent some time to do that. And then, and you need a strategic plan. You cannot keep operating by the seat of your pants. I mean, the reality of it is you're a special interest group away from a policy. And you can't live that way. You have to have a plan. You have to control your future, and that plan has to be flexible and fluid. So I really do like the idea, based on what you're saying, is let's create three overarching goals. And understand that the pandemic is priority one for everybody, including you. What is it going to look like when you're back being functional. And I'm not saying you're not functional, but, you know, there's a lot of concern out there with regard, what is it going to look like? So, I mean, does that help if I frame it up that way? And then what you expect as a board of directors is for Dr. Menzel to give you updates. Now, you're doing some of the work right now, and you'll see it in evidence in action, but put it on your monthly board meeting agenda, update on district priorities. Where are we? You know, your community has a real desire to need to know that. But really, every one of the, when we work with first-year supes and boards, these are broad and overarching, and then year two, they get a lot more specific. Now you have a strategic plan. Now you can put the indicators and the action plan for goals on how you're going to get there, and you can measure your effectiveness by that. Does that help if we look at it?
Yes, I think that perspective is important to hear, especially, I'll say for me, once again, because what happens is I think, at least I can speak for myself, and I believe the board also, we have confidence in Dr. Menzel. That's why we hired him. And I can say in the 45 days that he's been here and prior to that, I have only heard positive comments and confidence in his abilities, especially his communication skills, which I know are so appreciated and will only help to calm some of the passion that you hear and some of the frustration that you hear. I think that when you asked for this type of a conversation, it's going to get messy, it's going to get passionate because we care so much for our students and our community. And it's not reflective of your abilities or how we see the superintendent coming into work. But I do think it's important to hear the details of those priorities. Otherwise, they get misinterpreted. And so I am thankful that we can have these discussions. We also have to remember, we never get to talk to each other outside this room. So when we're here, this is, if we're going to have real, authentic conversation, we need to be able to be comfortable and be able to share. And I think that that's what you hear also. And so I appreciate the perspective, but I think there's also perspective on our side, given the fact that we don't get to meet and have these discussions very often, and we're appreciative of them. And then I'm just going to follow up. I don't know that there is any disagreement with the strategic plan. I know I'm in full support of it. I've heard from 2 other board members, and I've seen shaking heads. The strategic plan that was put in place, even though it's not enforced and it's not looked at, was through 2020. So it was a natural time to go into the next strategic plan. And I don't think anybody is not in favor of it, but I don't want to speak for it. Barbara?
And I do want to add that too, because yes, you're correct. It was years ago, there was a tremendous amount of effort on a strategic plan. And then there was the last 4 or 5, however many years, I think we shifted away from a strategic plan as it was done then, and instead focused on a big culture shift in SUSD. And I don't want to discount that. I don't want to act like nothing has happened in years. We've taken a wild ride, yes, these last few years, but we also had some huge culture shifts around data, around assessment of our students and what they know. Also, a huge culture shift in accepting that we needed to look at where we really were and who we really are as SUSD. And we had a lot of challenges in doing that work. And so I just don't want to discount all the work, especially around data and assessment, and even evaluations of our staff and teachers, and evaluations of ourselves as a district, where we really are, and looking in a mirror. That was difficult, painful work, and I just don't want to dismiss it as we haven't done anything. So there's.
Thank you.
I got it.
John Michael?
So should we now, just being cognizant of the time, should we combine some of these, or do we want to give Dr. Menzel the opportunity to put forward maybe 2 or 3 that he thinks in his understanding addresses a number of these, unless that's putting you on the spot and you don't want to do that, being cognizant of the fact that COVID is such a big issue on the day-to-day, what might you like to see, since it does have to be mutual between all of us, that, we're all in this together? Would that be an appropriate thing, Dr. Joel, or do you not recommend that? Do you think that's a bad idea? I don't want to step on anyone's process here.
No, that's an option, certainly. I mean, I can work with Dr. Menzel and I can work together to kind of capture the essence of this and give it to you as a draft at some point where, you can look at it. I think, yeah, that's certainly okay. I will tell you, in a lot of districts, the board president and the superintendent sit down and, create the draft. And a lot of times it's a lot easier to come to some kind of consensus. We'll do whatever. But I do appreciate the conversation. I do appreciate where you are, the space and time. And it's, this is difficult work. I mean, there's just no question about it. And I'd like to tell you a lot's going to get done this year, but, education in America right now is dealing with the biggest priority ever. And, until we get that under control, it's going to be really hard to focus on a lot of those other things. Now, I'm talking learning gaps are important because that's a part of that pandemic recovery plan. So no, I think if the board is willing, if you want to do that, I mean, we could make a run at that. I think there's enough information here. If you said to me, combine them, I could combine them.
Dr. Menzel?
So I'll just do a quick out loud reflection on some of what we have and how I'm hearing it, how I think some of it fits. So addressing the needs of our students in terms of an academic priority and being very clear about how we're going to do that in a COVID environment. So the focus is still centering our students and what their needs are to achieve their full potential. Our reality, which we always have to start from, is now influenced by a global pandemic. And so how are we going to attend to our commitment to ensure every student achieves their full potential in this environment? And there are a lot of moving parts and pieces, but it is a part of our overall academic goal. So to me, that's not incompatible. No. And then to Sandy's point on the focus on academics, emphasis on these other programs, I actually want to look at those programs and ask the question, how are they operating in a COVID environment? And does that really, maybe it's not a problem with Avid. Does Avid work in a virtual environment? What shifts or adjustments have been made? And then we ultimately have to ask the question, how do we know? AZ Merit was shelved last year. What are the data points that we're going to use to identify student growth? Because it's really growth over some static metric. And we have got kids all along the continuum. We have a graduating class of 2021. What are we doing to make sure they're prepared for their next step, whatever that is? That's part of our core work as an organization. What becomes a part of the goal, I think, for the superintendent is how are we going to navigate those questions in this environment? And on the financial front, it's the same kind of thing. We don't know what the impacts of COVID are going to be on our enrollment, both those that are coming back in person and those that are online now who may stay online, and what's the long-term impact. But we have to be prepared for it. We have to have those conversations. We have to talk about if-then kinds of statements. So I think when I look at almost all these things, I see the tie to the broad overarching goal, but absent starting on the road to where we're going, those are just still routine to me. The bigger picture, the more compelling thing for Scottsdale Unified is what do we want to become, and how do we create a clear and compelling destination picture for where we'll be so that we can work towards that from our current reality. So we can be accomplishing both the immediacy, and I made a note that when I think about some of the comments I've heard, there's a certain triage element to the work that we do. We know we've got systems that are broken, that you point, I can talk to each one of you and you say, that's not working and hasn't been working. There's a certain triage that we can do short-term to attend to that. And I'm thinking specifically about contracts that are given before evaluations are finished and then frustration. There's a triage response to that to make sure we address it. And then there's the long-term, what's the most effective evaluation strategy to ensure peak performance by every person who works at Scottsdale Unified? Both are important, right? We got to make sure that we don't keep moving people along if they're not performing to our standards. And we should be saying, well, what is the best evaluation system long-term to ensure high levels of performance from everyone that works in the organization? The second one's going to take longer than the first one, so there's a triage element. So for me, I'm always trying to figure out what's the both and. What are the things that address, known concerns that we can do short-term while recognizing that to build the systems of the future, it's going to hinge on clarity on where we're going and then working backwards from that. So that's sort of how I'm processing what I'm hearing.
Thank you. Dr. Joel?
I just took the liberty while Dr. Menzel was talking. Here's what I wrote down. So to react to this. In addition to the day-to-day duties, develop an understanding of the needs of our students to fulfill their highest potential during and following the COVID pandemic environment. I think that gets to everyone, to me, would get to every one of your academic concerns, right? Not going to be easy work, but it's there. Secondly, initiate the process of long-range planning to develop Scottsdale Unified into the most impactful and effective district for all students in the country.
Country seems a little limited.
Any comments?
I know, I kind of played on words there a little bit at the end on that long-range one, but
Outside of
because
Nebraska.
you're reading a book.
All right, any comments? How do you feel about those as a start of the wordsmithing to narrow these down? Do I say Bueller?
I'm
Yeah.
fine with those as first-year objectives.
Patty supports. Okay, so what we can do is start with those, and then we'll be sending a draft out, because we won't be making any, I'm sorry, I apologize. We won't be making any decisions tonight, so that we can look at those. And then that gives everybody a chance to, go back, think about it, and,
And
Jan Michael?
I don't see any reason why these 12 concepts, because they will shorten them and make them into something, when they're put underneath, they'll just be plugged in underneath, as parts of the measurement. And that way, it's all wrapped up and what we can get to logically. And I think, student metrics and reviewing what data we do have, right, that's something that will very likely be, if it's not all, I assume in large part it's already being reviewed and has been reviewed, but even more of it will be, putting these strategies together. I think we just toss them into those buckets, and that's what we say for the year. What we get to, why didn't we get to certain things, why we did get to certain things, what did we achieve and learn from them. That's a really good way of starting off.
Am I correct, Dr. Joel, too, that when we establish those, the next steps are on your established performance objectives? You go through kind of the evaluation procedures, you put together kind of an action plan. So the easiest one you can think of is the strategic plan. You start to put together the calendar for making that happen, right? And so we're going to be getting progress reports on these objectives. And then, so we're going to be seeing those measurements as you have focus groups over Zoom, per se, and we'll know that we had those, so you can kind of check off that we're progressing. Is that correct?
Right. And, as part of your evaluation of Dr. Menzel, one of the recommendations we always make to the superintendent is keep a binder of all the work that you're doing and as authentic evidence that, you've tended to these things. This has been a priority. So, that can be captured in several different ways. But no, you need to, if you agree that we're close on these two, then ensure that there are timely updates on the work. The gift that you give your first year superintendent is a chance to go in, eyes wide open, learn about the nuances, learn about the stuff that's in the broom closet. I'm sure he's received lots of advice and information and, about the way we
It's Scottsdale, remember?
step back and be objective. And if you adopt these two, I think you're giving him that invitation to go out and start having some good conversations with people, and maybe even courageous conversations. Because I think you were pretty clear today, as you were when we initiated the search process. There's a lot of work to be done here. I mean, I don't remember who it was. It might have been Allison. I remember one time you said to me in one of our meetings, there was a time where everybody wanted to send their kids to Scottsdale Unified. That it was the place, and I don't remember how long ago it was.
1978.
What does it take to get back to? Why isn't that the way it is? I mean, we heard that from your stakeholder groups, internal and external. So, to me, as a superintendent, I know this is where Dr. Menzel's coming from. We talked about this. This is a golden opportunity to come to a place and really hit a reset button and do the work that he's been trained to do and he wants to do. But boy, this pandemic just got in the way.
It did, and I think too that probably what you're learning is that even though we have patience underneath, we don't show it all the time. And so that's something to remember also. I agree with what you just said.
So here's what I would suggest. Give me a chance to process this. I'll be in touch with Dr. Menzel and Allison, and we'll get you something that maybe you can consider at your Tuesday board meeting. Would that be fair? To have a follow-up conversation on. I'm not trying to press your timeline at all. I just want to make sure that there's a product here.
Dr. Menzel and I did talk about that. We were thinking more September 1 because we do have so much going on with COVID. So if that's acceptable, that gives everybody else a little breathing room to look at the drafts because they still have to go through their board books.
Anything else you need from me at this point in terms of this? I mean, we'll go to work on this right now, and ultimately we'll ask you to approve them, and to hold yourselves and Dr. Menzel accountable for making sure that these are broadly communicated. And one of the things that has always worked with not only myself but any superintendent I've worked with is once the board takes action, this is when you're visiting schools, Dr. Menzel, you're talking to community groups, this is your jumping off point. These are the things that you've agreed, and I think people begin to pay attention. You engage in some of that long range, short and long range planning, and you'll captivate people's attention. I mean, we had so much community feedback going through this search process that there's a lot of work there, but it can all be streamlined to accomplish what it is that I know each one of you wants to see accomplished. And so the future's indeed bright. It's been a real pleasure working with you. I mean, this has been a successful search for me in a lot of ways, and without question, you landed the right person at the right time to take you to the next level.
We feel that way also. Want to thank you for taking on kind of solely this second attempt at the search. We appreciated it. As president this past 6 months, I appreciate the opportunity that you've provided with your time and your energy to talk through a lot of things. So thank you very much. I want to give an opportunity to the other board members if they have anything they want to say before Dr. Joel signs off.
I think we all echo that statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we wish you luck in Nebraska and in Lincoln. We know it's tough everywhere. So God be with you.
If you want to feel good about what's not happening yet in Scottsdale, Google Lincoln and see these are real challenges in reopening schools, and there is no right decision. I mean, we've had protests in our parking lots. It's just been tough, and it's been tough for everybody.
Been there, done that.
Right.
You can't minimize what it represents. But anyway, real pleasure. Good luck. I stand. Part of our contract with you is I'll be working as in any way that Dr. Menzel needs, a phone call, conversation, think through an issue, and if I can come back down there and help you with anything, I'm more than happy to do it. I think your future's bright. go get it. Work together. If you do that, your kids are going to be the ultimate beneficiaries. So with that, I'll sign off, and then I'll get my information off to Dr. Menz.
Okay, we'll
Thank
speak.
you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Joel.
Okay. I'll give board members an opportunity again before we adjourn the meeting. And Dr. Menzel, if you have anything you'd like to say.
So I just want to thank you for your time. It's 2.5 hours in. It's important to have a conversation and put things on the table and to see where people are coming from. And so I look forward. I know that we'll bring something back as a starting point, and I'm glad we have till September 1st to do some massaging of it because we have important topics for Tuesday. Thank you.
You're all right. Thank you. With that, then I will adjourn. Let me put these glasses on again. Never get used to it. All right. I move to adjourn this special meeting of the Governing Board. Do I have a second?
Second.
Board Member Kravitz, seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. This special meeting of the Governing Board on August 13, 2020 is adjourned at 6:35 PM. Thank you.